All right, welcome to a special edition of this webinar presented by SolCyber, a discussion on securing startups and securing small, medium-sized businesses and what those realities look like. My name is Ryan Naraine. I'm host of the Security Conversations podcast, and I've put together a real fun panel discussion here on the issues of attempting to secure this small business. Before we get into the conversation, I'll let the guys introduce themselves first and give me a little bit of your background, title, name, title, background, and your company. Starting with you, Ray.
Yeah, hey guys, my name is Ray Panahon. I'm currently the SVP of Technology over here at Blu Digital Group. I've been in technology for a couple decades, primarily working on the tech and infrastructure side for media, entertainment, and gaming companies.
What is Blue Digital Group and like how big is this? How big is the organization?
Blu Digital Group is about 110 now these days. They have actually been around for over 12 years and have focused primarily on digital media services and processing. So the preparing of feature content and delivered content to be delivered on streaming platforms and different devices.
Right, I will get into why cybersecurity and getting security right is an important part of not only your business, but the business of your customers and within that supply chain of things. Will, I'll let you go next.
Hello. I'm Will Lin. I'm one of the managing directors at Forgepoint and also one of the founding partners. Forgepoint is a cybersecurity focused venture capital firm. We've made 41 investments dedicated towards protecting the digital future, including one of the investors for SolCyber. Myself, I'm on the investing side, and so that means I sit on multiple boards and I work towards helping build our businesses for the long term.
We'll talk for a little bit about your company's decision to invest in SolCyber and invest in a company that's addressing this problem space.
Yeah, I'm Chris Castaldo. I'm the CISO at Crossbeam. I'm also the author of Startup Secure, which is very topical for our chat today. And I'm also a visiting fellow at the National Security Institute.
I'm glad you talked about the book, Chris. I have it right here. Let's start with you. In the book, the book is described as a guide to baking cybersecurity into your company from founding to exit. Now, there's a lot of pressure on startup founders or even small businesses, small medium-sized businesses, to get the business off the ground, get things rolling, get into your sales process, and we can always bake security down in the back end. You argue that security has to be baked into the very, very beginning and become a stable table stakes issue. Why is that? Why can't we focus on the other things and then add security later on?
I think there is a misnomer that is the case, right? There's two barriers to entry for cybersecurity, I believe. One being the financial side. I think people don't think it's affordable and something they can do early on. And then on the technology side, right? Like you look at any of our frameworks, any of the terminology we use day in, day out in cybersecurity. You sometimes have to be an expert just to understand it. And I don't think that needs to be the case. And I don't think that's even reality, right? A founder with no technology background should be able to pick this stuff up and implement at least the basic things, right? Identity and access management, right? Multi-factor. We all tell people they need to turn on multi-factor. It's widely supported nowadays. Things like data encryption, right? Most founders now are building their products in modern infrastructure providers, whether it's AWS, Azure, GCP. They all have security controls you can turn on from the start. So I think there's a kind of misconception that it's actually expensive and hard.
But what about if you're like a doctor's office or a medium-sized business? Ray, and you can jump in here about the realities of properly securing a small to medium-sized businesses. You guys are 100 plus people, so you're on the larger end than say a doctor's office or another small business that would be attempting to get security right. The theory is you need security staff. The reason we see all these attacks and ransomware attacks is because these companies are understaffed, underutilized, and it's very, very difficult to get security right. From your perch, do you agree with Christopher that it shouldn't be something difficult, or is this a real significant challenge as you're trying to ramp up your business?
She probably could agree with both sides. I'll say that anyone that's probably trying to extensively secure their environment are, going to be looking at some expenses and some investment needed to go at great lengths. But at the baseline, to get yourself maybe 80% of the way, or applying the Pareto principle, there's some really great companies out there that are starting to really put together well-packaged services and solutions that cover the largest sort of threat vectors that a majority of small to medium-sized businesses face today.
And you can still benefit from that even without a security staff or a dedicated person or even a CISO in place. You're saying there are a lot of that stuff can be or should be outsourced early in the game.
I think that these days, one can probably argue that the level of craft expertise that's needed to properly secure technical infrastructures, both on-prem and in cloud, right, require a lot of dedicated talent and discipline and expertise. And, it's just understanding that these things are becoming more complex and more widespread with respect to all the areas that you're supposed to secure within your environment. I would be surprised that if companies aren't even looking to at least augment their existing security staff with smaller companies that have dedicated kind of focused personnel and talent.
And Will, when you and I have spoken at length about like your investment strategy and the way you look at things, and one of the things that has always stood out to me is you say everyone is an investor. And I feel for the purposes of this conversation, everyone's a security guy because we all have our own private Gmails, we all have our own digital identities and digital footprint that we all manage in certain ways. So I feel like bringing security, with everyone being a security guy, bringing that mindset, it's, do you feel like that mindset is changing, that yeah, we can get security right, we are paying attention to security earlier in the game for customers of SolCyber or startups, or even Forgepoint Capital might be a startup itself responsible for securing your own assets and so on? Have you seen that that pattern changing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the part of it is the nice thing is that we do have historical experience around sort of security controls that everyone does purchase or everyone does buy or use. And so, for instance, the antivirus I think was a classic example of something that we all had experience with. And so part of it is just sort of extending that more and more and figuring out what is the next step beyond antivirus, because the threat landscape is so much more complicated now than it was before. Does antivirus really cover ransomware use cases? No, not really. They cover some for sure, but that is not an adequate protection for ransomware. There's also a lot of things around sort of doing better detections, for example, and some of those things you can automate, but at the end of the day, you still need someone with a little bit of expertise to really rationalize, hey, is this a real bad issue, or is this just sort of a table stake that happens every single day kind of thing as well? But the nice thing is that all this expertise is being spread amongst the ecosystem, and so there are more and more and more people now that can provide the necessary sort of 80-20 rule that Ray mentioned.
And Chris, in addition to being an author of a book and helping guide folks through this, you're a CISO yourself. You're Chief Information Security Officer at Crossbeam, again, responsible for securing a startup and responsible for securing a company in this space. Without getting into too many technical details, can you talk to me a little bit about how you make the decision about what to secure in-house, what to outsource, and is there any risk and any sort of absorbing of risk in that decision to outsource security to an external place? Just talk a little bit about that decision, that mindset, and what goes into the thinking.
Yeah, I think at a high level, right, in a startup, you're taking calculated risks, right? Anyone starting a business, that is how you succeed, is taking the right risks in the right places. So I see it kind of as our job as security practitioners is helping the business take those right risks in the right places. So coming into an organization, obviously getting the lay of the land, figuring out where the strengths are, where the weaknesses are, where the gaps are, and then putting, whatever your finite resources are, to those gaps, right? Depending, let's say it's a development organization, you're building a SaaS product. Well, you're probably going to have a lot of engineers, SREs. Maybe some of those folks will help assist on security things, right? Maybe you can rely on that stuff, but they're maybe not going to look at like Will was talking about, looking at antivirus alerts, right? Someone still has to look at that stuff. Maybe they'll help you deploy the tool, but they're not going to help like maintain it, right? That's a great spot to outsource. And I think there's a lot of different opportunities in any organizations. First, taking stock of what do you have in place, where the gaps are, and then addressing those specific gaps. And those are going to be different from organization to organization.
And Ray, is it even possible to bring all of this in-house? I mean, isn't it? Talk from your side, from your side of the house. Is it, what goes into one making that decision, and is it even possible to get a full solid security stack in place internally in this environment when everything is in the cloud and everything is digital?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you look at a company that has been around for 12 plus years and who has secured an investment to sort of rebrand and relaunch as like a new startup that's going from white glove service to you know um, a number of different products in the cloud. um, you're sort of faced with this challenge of having to take an evolutionary approach to how you want to practice security, right? And I was sort of I came in here with the task of not only changing the culture and the tech stack and the way that we operate and approach security, but formulating more of like an organized security posture that could work between both what we were doing with our product in the cloud as well as what we were doing with our staff and our employees and our contracted resources. So the quick answer is yes. I mean, the one thing that I was trying to be sensitive of about was for the engineering talent that I was bringing on board, how could I preserve those precious cycles away from the sort of iterations that are required to be good at security, right? And I look at SolCyber and a lot of the things that they were able to cover, right, from like a baseline perspective, and they checked off a number of those boxes. And um, you know, previously, I think you'll see different product offerings and service offerings from different folks. But what's interesting about a company like SolCyber is, they're able to cover quite a number of different areas of concern that we had. Not all, but definitely took a lot of operational risk, out of sort of our concern, our high level of concern that we had.
And Will, I'll get you a little bit on the services side of things. But Chris, I wanted you to just dovetail on that from Ray. One of the things, the reality is you guys face is the decision about buying piecemeal versus going with a company that can provide a complete stack. Can you talk a little bit about those trade-offs, the balance that you have to strike, and how do you go about determining what the complete stack looks like? Give me a sense of, what does a company like SolCyber really solve for a company of your size?
Yeah, I think it's a few different things. One, if it's an organization with no security team, right, they bring a breadth of tools that will immediately reduce risk, right? Maybe it's not the one tool that you would have picked as a security practitioner with 30 plus years of experience. Maybe there's one that has some other whiz bang feature that you would prefer that you have, but it's better than nothing. I kind of equate it to multi-factor, right? Everyone says don't use SMS as multi-factor. Well, I agree. Yes, there's vulnerabilities in the underlying system, but nothing is worse than not having SMS, right? So I think there's a trade-off there. There's also a trade-off maybe in getting baked into something where your company does scale, right? Earlier you mentioned a dentist office. They're probably not going to grow to 1,000 employees in one location. So getting baked in there probably isn't a big risk. But maybe for your organization, maybe one of those tools doesn't really scale beyond 500, beyond 1,000 employees. Maybe that's something you address then, and maybe you carve that out. As Ray was talking about, bringing stuff in-house eventually is probably going to happen, because we've kind of seen the big monoliths, MSSPs of the early 2000s, 90s, or kind of still serving that enterprise market, but there's really no one for Ray and I up until maybe the last few years, right?
And and Will, are you seeing a lot of big, large enterprises as well doing some of this outsourcing, whether it's to the SOC or whether it's to some EDR data lake provider? Are you seeing uptick and some sort of traction for this type of business, not only for small and medium-sized businesses, but even when a company scales, bringing along some of those outsourced providers that have their stacks in place? Is that something that's popping up in your circles?
Yeah, I think the talent dynamic is one of the most painful issues that everyone's dealing with in the security industry. I think not only do you have to find them, you have to train them, and then you have to also retain them.
When you say
And
talent
so,
dynamic, you mean like
yeah,
just skills shortage, inability to find people, and the disparity between the haves and the have-nots paying super salaries for everyone to get to the big programs. And like you call it a dynamic, but it's a significant problem for CISOs and security programs.
even the haves have a tough time, I think, with talent right now in this environment. And so money isn't enough anymore. You can't just throw that to solve situations. Because even let's say you do hire this person with a lot of money, retaining them is also a pain to accomplish as well. And so we have the Great Resignation. We have all these the demand and supply in security sort of really out of whack. And so what that is creating is large companies are doing this as well. They are outsourcing more and more work to third parties because it is just inefficient to try to maintain their own SOC, for example. It is inefficient to choose these toolings and then to integrate all of them together, for example. And so there are a lot of sort of these platform decisions that a lot of firms are making. Do they decide to stick with legacy SIEM? Do they decide to stick with the next cloud-based SIEM? Do they decide to build something straight from scratch and build like a data lake, data warehouse, security analytics situation as well? And each of those come with very different requirements in terms of the team that you need. And I think more and more, even the most modern programs who are saying that was really painful. Like I loved learning about how this all came together, but I probably, like looking back, I probably would have paid someone. Like I would have been happily paying someone to do this for me. And then not only that, I've implemented it. Now I have to maintain it. I have to look at all the alerts that are coming out of it. And I can't find the people who'd be willing to sit in front of a screen all day and look at these alerts as well. And so outsourcing has become a theme, I think, for the entire security industry, at least at this point in time. And I think when we even look at security budgets as a whole, and for instance, Gartner's projection, 2/3 of all security budgets go to services. It's only 1/3 that go to software. But of course, we spend all of our time talking and thinking about software.
I'll throw a question out to both Ray and Chris, and you guys can bounce it back with each other. Does going the outsource route as a small, medium-sized business help or hurt your efforts at audits and compliance audits? Like, does this make it easier? Does it make it harder? How do you balance and how do you navigate that road?
Yeah, sure. For us, I mean, it absolutely makes it easier for us, right?
How and
Um,
why?
you know, w- with respect to, what Will was saying with sort of all of the solutions that are out there, um, we're obviously looking for a trusted expert in the space to give us filtered down options for solutions that meet our current requirement sets, right? And as you can imagine, for Blu Digital, we work with feature content and copyrighted IP, right? And uh, there are significant amounts of steps and sort of protocols to follow with respect to how one should be securing their environment, right? And to think about adding another 4 or 5 or 6 different solutions to check off the boxes, right, with our vendors and with our partners and with the trusted partner network and whatnot, that's a lot of work and a lot of time. And we all know that the most valuable thing here is time, and losing out on that opportunity, right? So having a partner that allows us to be agile and also allows us to scale up as the business grows as well as it scales down adds so much intrinsic value I can't even put a price on because of how fast this sort of like vertical also moves, not only with media services but security landscape.
And Chris, when you think about compliance in some highly regulated industries, startups in regulated industries as well, does this help? Does this make things easier? Does it like smoothen your audit process? Talk to me about how it works.
Absolutely, definitely with auditors and even with customer audits as well, right? Being in a B2B SaaS organization, right? We're reviewed by our customer security teams, and these types of organizations that are now servicing us and SMBs, right? Not just scaling startups, but it allows you to have a more mature program and access things that you wouldn't access until maybe you hit 1,000 employees, right? Until you're hiring people in house. I'm not going to build a SOC that manages and monitors things 24/7, 365, follow the sun model type organization, right? I'd probably double the size of our company overnight if I did that. But I can rely on this organization that's doing that for hundreds or thousands of other startups, and I can immediately get that maturity, at the flip of a switch, or signing of a term sheet, an agreement. So I think it's hugely beneficial.
And your customers and your auditors like this as well, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So looking at it from the auditor standpoint, I can show evidence that things are being looked at. So going back to, we're talking about antivirus EDR earlier, I can show the audit trail of, here's the person at this organization that opened the ticket. They looked at the alert, they triaged the alert, they commented, they either closed it because it's a false positive, or they took some action because it was a true positive, right? That's what auditors are looking for. And same on the customer side too, right? If you're housing sensitive customer data, they want to see that evidence too.
What are you missing? And Ray and Will, you guys can jump in here as well. When you go the outsource route, what are you missing? Is there something you're missing? Some sort of face-to-face thing, control? What is the downside of outsourcing all of it or most of it?
Sure. I think from my perspective, when you look at some more of the long-term solutions that have been out there for a while that are obviously a lot more robust with respect to capabilities, you think about the nice to haves, right? And you try to figure out the balance that you have with a partner like SolCyber and what is the risk factors that are involved with not having some of those additional knobs and dials that you have with some of these other solutions providers, right? And um, I think that raises a big question about how does a company like SolCyber scale, right, to meet those sort of needs, or from my perspective, I'm sort of tasked with, well, do I start bringing in additional security partners and solutions to all sort of be a cook in the kitchen, so to speak, right? And this is sort of like the challenges I'm having to deal with.
Will, you have a thought on outsourcing versus keeping things in house? The trade off of what you miss out on by outsourcing.
Yeah. I think one dynamic with outsourcing is that you do sort of have to find the company that is the best fit for you as well, right? Because you as a customer might have different demands than another customer in another industry or another size as well. And so their roadmap and their suite of solutions that are pre-integrated might not be the right solutions for you. And so that's where you sort of grow together. You sort of have to find the right partner to grow together as well. And so in some ways, it's really important to think about who are your fellow customers with this outsource. Because if you're all on the same page, then that outsourcer is going to also continue working on serving those same customers well. But if there's too much diversity, or you're working with a firm that normally they only serve the Fortune 20, and you are, a 5-person company, their pricing is going to be out of whack. The solutions that they're going to suggest to you are going to be out of whack as well. But the nice thing about startups is that you're always there's so many out there that you're going to find the right fit for you, and then that way you can actually benefit from their work versus lose out from their work, because that provider, which has similar customers to you in many other places, will hear these requests by your fellow customers, and they will build in that feature functionality, and you won't have to ask for it.
All right, we're running out of time, so I want to wrap up with what good security looks like. Cybersecurity is an ongoing thing. It's never fixed. It's a constant chasing of managing and mitigating risk as we go along. We started off this conversation by making the suggestion that it's really, really difficult for startups and small and medium-sized businesses to get cybersecurity right. However, from listening to this conversation, a lot of you folks are feeling like you're comfortable with this approach of outsourcing some and so on. So let me wrap up here with Chris, with you. In your mind, what is the basics and foundational things within not necessarily mature, but a robust cybersecurity program? What are the 5, 6 things that must be in place before you can even consider yourselves, in some level of managing risk?
So I'll give you the three things from the book. So focusing on the data first, focusing on the systems that data lives on, or the systems that have access to it, and then the people or services that have access to all of that within there, right? So you kind of view three concentric circles, and data could be your sensitive employee data. It could be IP that you're developing in your organization. It could be a physical thing, right? It could be a SCADA IoT system, right? Maybe you don't produce any sensitive data, but you have systems that are extremely sensitive, right? So making it manageable and focusing on those three buckets first, I think goes a long way in building that foundation and then doing the fun, exotic things as your organization matures and grows.
And Ray, when you think of that foundation, what are the top 5 items within, say, a SolCyber stack that is non-negotiable?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's funny with sort of the three things that Chris mentioned. I'm probably more backwards, where I have a heavy emphasis on our employees and our staff and our partners, making sure that we are providing the right tools, right, the right systems, as well as the right training, right, and awareness to basically do the highest level of protection that we can enable a person to sort of have in their work environment, right? And on our product and in our platform, I'd probably put the heaviest amount of emphasis on that, next to sort of looking at systems and having good controls and a good partner to work with who can say, hey, we noticed this, or we think you guys need to do this, right? And then lastly, is like on a larger level, is like, what are the sort of the tools, the controls, and the protocols that you have in place, right? Are you in contact with your local FBI office, right? Do you know, law enforcement, do you know, at least 3 different security practices in your Rolodex that you can consult with just to get feedback and establish some sort of like annual feedback loop, right? And I can't say enough about having just protocols and a process in place, even at a high level of, hey, if this happens, how, what are the steps that we follow, to sort of track and manage an incident.
And Will, you get the last word on what in your mind does good, reliable, uh, uh, mature security looks like for the mid market.
I really like taking a threat-based approach to it. I think sort of like what are the most common issues or pain points that someone has to deal with, and then working backwards from there. And so I think for the SMB, the common ones are very endpoint sort of malware, ransomware centric, also very phishing centric as well. And then I think the third one is very identity type centric, so access control or improper access. Between those sort of 3 components, you can sort of start seeing how you can sort of shut off all the really easy gates that might be open into someone's building or to someone's home, and then you start building more and more on top of it. So like, okay, now I want to have better detection, so as well. And now I want to be able to be able to respond better, because it's going to happen. Now I need some really good resilience, for example. Top dynamics.
All right, gentlemen, Ray, Will, Chris, thank you so much. And I want to say thanks again to our sponsors at SolCyber. Check them out at solcyber.com. They have a complete stack And those are the professionals that can help you figure out, this issue of managing risk and managing security within your organization. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.